So let's start by talking about our setup here. So what I've done is I have a fresh installation of Laravel, and I have also defined a few models here, and I have also defined a few models here for classes, sections, and student. So each student belonging to a certain class and a section. So if we go ahead and check our migration files, as you can see, we have a column called name for a class. And under sections, we have class ID belonging to, so each section belongs to a certain class and name for that section. And we have students table. So each student belongs to a certain class and section. And we have the name, email, address, and phone number for that specific students. And I have also defined a few seeders for classes, sections, and students. So classes seeder has class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Section seeder has section A and section B for each class. That is class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will have section A and B. And students seeder, I have created a factory for the students which will create 50 records. So if we go ahead and check out our students factory, then you can see we have name, email, phone number, address, class ID, and section ID. So for the class ID and section ID, what we are doing here is we are randomly defining a class ID between 1 and 5. And for the section ID, what we are doing is we are querying the section model where the class ID is this class ID, and we'll get the first record and we'll set it to the section ID. And maybe one more thing that we need to do here is this will get the model. So we need to define the section ID and the ID. Okay, this will work. Now let's go ahead and migrate our database. So I have already defined a database, created a database and defined now in an env file. What I'm going to do here is I'll just do php artisan migrate fresh, and I also want to run the seed. So our migration has been completed. So if we go ahead and check our database, as you can see, we have class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sections A and B for each class. And for the students, we have 50 records containing all the necessary data along with the specific class and section ID. So this is working fine. And the next thing, okay, let me just also show the students.blade.php file. I have defined a backend folder which consists of students.blade.php, and this consists of all the markup that we need in order to develop the data tables. So if we go ahead and check our browser, you can see that we are displaying this data tables here. So we'll be replacing all these with our dynamic data, fetching all the records from our database, and we'll be implementing everything. So our next step that we need to do is let's go to Laravel UI, and we'll install this package in order to install the Vue. So we'll be using Laravel UI in order to install Vue. So I'll just copy this and paste that in a command line, hit enter, and I'll be right back once this finishes installing. Laravel UI has been successfully installed, and our next step is to create the scaffolding for Vue. So let's go ahead and copy and paste that here. So Vue scaffolding has been done, and our next step is I'll just quickly install the npm, run the npm install and npm run dev, and be right back. So I have successfully executed the npm install command, and let's go ahead and run the npm run dev, hit enter, and it finished, but we need to run mix again. So what we can now actually do is run again npm run dev, and this time it will compile successfully. So it will give an error for the first time, so keep that in mind. And the compilation has been successful. So now let's go ahead and in our students.blade.php, what we can do is in order to test our app, what we can do is, since we have a component, since we have an example component and it is registered as example component in our app.js, what we can actually do is in our students.blade.php, let's keep that, let's call that example component, save that, and let's go ahead and reload our browser. Okay, one more thing that we need to do is, let's go ahead and we need to define an ID of app in our main root element. So, okay, this is done. And the next thing that we need to do is, let's go to the master.blade.php, and on the bottom, we also need to call the app.js file, since this is the file that is actually, so in our public js app.js, this is the file that is actually get compiled to. We need to call that app.js file, js with js and app.js. Save that. Let's go ahead and reload our browser once again. And this time Vue.js is detected. As you can see, we are seeing the example component here. And in our Vue tab, okay, I don't see that Vue tab here. So in order to use the pagination feature, first let's go ahead and define the routes for this. So what we need to do is, let's go to the routes and api.php and define a route, student controller class, and on the index page, index function. So let's go to the student controller and define so here what I want to do is I want to get all the students, and in here we'll be using API resources to format our data. So let's go ahead in our terminal and create a resource, name it student resource, and maybe we also need to provide I don't remember. Okay, we don't need it maybe. Okay, let's create that. The resource has been created. So in our resources, student resource, what we are gonna do here is, let's customize this a little bit. So we'll be sending the name as this name. So the reason we are doing this here is that I want to display the class and section for that specific student. So I want to format that and also format the created at date. So here, the name, the email address, phone number, and section. So this section and name. So we haven't defined the relation yet. The class will be this class name. So now what we need to, okay, we also need to send the ID. So don't forget to send the student ID. So this will be needed when we are looping to each of the students using for loop in Vue.js. So this ID will be the unique identifier for each data. Now let's go to the student model. In our student.php, let's define two functions, two relations. So the first will be classes, return this belongs to classes class, and we also need to specify the foreign key, since we have different table, different model name and the different foreign key, so we need to specify that. And for this section will be, okay, I think we can actually define this as class, and we want to return this belongs to section class, and we don't need the foreign key here. So in our student controller, since we are getting all the students, then I want to return the student resource collection with the value of students. Okay, now let's go ahead and test this out. So in our api.php, when we hit the /api/students route, we want to go to the student controller class on the index function. So in the student controller, what we are doing is we are fetching all the students. And what we can actually do here is we can also perform the eager loading. So I want to get all the students along with their class and section, and I want to get these records. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this on our browser. So what we can actually do is we can go here and append an API / students. So okay, we are getting all the data, so I should actually use Postman, but it's fine for now. Let's go ahead and now display this records here. So let's define a new component, Vue.js component, that will be called as students index. So okay, we can define that in the components folder itself. It's up to you where we want to define. You can actually create a different folder for each student, a different folder for students, and another folder for another model. So that makes it quite easy. And students index.view. So this will be our view file. And first, let's go ahead and register this in our app.js. So what I'll do is I'll just copy this line and define it as students index, which is inside. And one more thing that I want to do here is I want to rename this to capital letters and write in camel case format. Okay, so now here is inside /components /students index.view.default. Let's save that and everything should work fine. Let me just remove these. And in our students index.view, let's define a new template for view, and let's also define the script. No, it's not this script, javascript.view. And here what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy this whole div, cut this whole div, and paste that in our template, save. And maybe we need to remove this comments. So this will be pagination links that we'll be using later, and everything should work fine. Save that. And okay, we don't need the JavaScript part for now, since we are only testing whether it's working or not. And we need to call the students index view file. Let's save that, and don't forget to run the npm run dev, or we can even run npm run watch. So our JavaScript has been compiled, and let's go ahead and check that on our browser. So everything is working as usual. And if you go ahead and inspect, again we have that problem. Okay, we have view and we have the students index component. So since we haven't defined any data or methods here, so this is empty for now. So let's go ahead and define some data properties in our Vue.js file. So for that, let's go to the students index, and in here I want to define a data property, which is gonna be a function and it's gonna return an object. So here what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna define a property called students, which is gonna be an empty object. And the next step that we'll be doing here is whenever the component is mounted, what I want to do is I want to call the Axios request here. So Axios is available globally on every Vue component, so we don't need to import that. So I want to call the /API /students route, and I'm making some mistakes. Okay, so this is gonna make the API request to /API /student, and then what I'm gonna do is we'll receive a response, and when I receive that response, then what I want to do is I want to store that data in our students data property. So this students is gonna be response.data is going to be the default. And since we are using the resource API resources, then what it's going to do is it is going to wrap our records in the data root element. So for that, what we need to do is we need to append one more data here. So let's save that and let's go to the browser and reload once again. Everything is working as expected, as usual. So if you go ahead and check this student index, then you can see we have a students object with a value of 50 items. So each object having all the required records. As you can see, we have address, class, email, ID, name, phone number, and section. So everything is working fine. So in order to display these data in the data table, what we need to do is we need to loop through each of these. So here, what I'm gonna do is, okay, let's loop. So v for students, student in students, and since we are using for loop, then I need to specify a key. So that will be student.id, and make sure to spell that correctly. Now what we need to do is we need to specify all of these properties here. So this will be student.name. Let me just copy this, and this one will be section. Save that, and let's go ahead and again reload our browser, and everything should work as expected. And as you can see, we have a record, students record being displayed here. So everything is working properly. Now one more thing, that is the created at. Since we are not passing the created at in our API resource probably. So in our student resource, what we need to do is we also need the created at, and let's format this properly. So this will be this created at, and what I want to do is I want to format this to date, formatted date string. Maybe I just forgot what it was. We'll just check it. Okay, it's good. So we can actually apply all of the Laravel related stuffs here, which we can manipulate and show it in the front end. So this is quite good. And now the only thing that we are here for is the pagination using Vue. So for that, what we need to do is we need to install a package called Laravel Vue Pagination. So this is a npm package. So for that, let's go ahead and install this. So Laravel Vue Pagination, open our terminal. Okay, let's create a new one. npm install Laravel Vue Pagination. And I'll be right back once this finishes installing. So the Laravel Vue Pagination package has been installed successfully. And the next step that we need to do is we need to register that component. So let's go ahead and copy that in our app.js, save that, paste that, and in order to use that component, we can save this. And in order to use that component, what we need to do is we need to define this pagination and send the data and pagination function. So here, let's go to the students index, and inside this div, I'm going to paste that, and our data will be students. And on pagination change page, we need to execute a function. So this will be, let's define a new function called get students, and let's define that. So this will be methods, which is going to be a function. And here I want to call a new function that is get students, and I want to call this function in our get students method. Let's format that. And on the mounted, what I want to do is I want to call the get students method. So now everything should work as expected. So pagination, we are sending the data as students since we have a students data, and on every pagination change page, what I want to do is I want to call the get students I want to call the getStudents method. And okay, one more thing that we need to do is, I think there's an error here. We need to send a parameter of page, which will be 1 by default. And the methods is gonna be an object, not a function. And one more thing that is, since we are paginating, so what we need to do is we need to specify the parameter as page. As you can see in here, it's mentioned. So on the method, since we are using the get results, it gets a parameter of page. So every time it calls the pagination change page, is going to call the get results and send the pagination value. So if the page is 2, then it will send the parameter as parameter value is 2. And if the page is 3, then it will send the parameter value as 3. And I want to go to example results and page equal to this page. So I need to call that here. So page will be page. Save that. And in our student controller, we also need to perform the pagination. So this will be paginate, and I wanna fetch 10 records at a time. So let's go ahead and reload our browser. Everything should work fine. And okay, there's a problem on the pagination part. Let's go ahead and check out invalid prop type check failed for prop data. Expected object got array. Okay, I found the bug. So since we were doing response.data.data, so that was the problem. So what we need to do is we only need to send the response.data, and everything else will be done by this package. So what we can do here is we can remove this extra line of data here. And now if we go ahead and reload our browser, everything should work as expected. But we don't see any results. So what's the problem? We have a data of 10. Okay. What we also need to do is, now here we need to specify the students dot data. Like that, and reload again. So now everything should work fine. And if I click on second page, then the data are reloaded and without any page refreshes, as you can see. So the last thing that we need to do in this video is to change the pagination values depending on this value. So let's go ahead and define the property here. So the first thing that we need is a data property called paginate. So this will be 10 by default. And on our paginate select tag, where's that? Okay, we have that here. So select, what we want to do is we want to v-model this with the paginate. Let's save that and let's check it. Everything is working fine or not. So we have view, we have paginate, which is 10. If I go ahead and change that to 20, that gets 20. So our v model is working fine. So now what we can do is we'll be sending that paginate value to our API. So here what we can do is, let's send that paginate equal to paginate. Okay, this paginate we need, so we can actually use the request function here. So let's go ahead and define that paginate value. So we'll be receiving that in the request paginate property. So if we don't get any value, then we'll be using 10 by default. And here now we can actually use this paginate. So it will be 10 by default. And if whenever we change that from our Vue application, that will make a new API request, and then this value will be updated. And according to that, we'll get the student's record. One more thing that we need to do is we need to watch for this paginate property. Where's that? So whenever this paginate property changes, will be executing another function. So we need to watch for this paginate property. So let's define a watcher, and this is gonna be a function, I think. Okay, this is not gonna be a function, this is a object. So we are gonna watch for the paginate. So whenever the paginate value changes, we'll be executing the function called, so what we want to do here is we want to fetch the students again. So what we can actually do is we can call the get students method here. So what it is going to do is, since we are watching for the paginate property, so every time this paginate value changes, then this get students function will be called. And here what we are doing is we are by default sending the page as 1. And since we have the v model, we are binding this with the paginate value, so we don't need to send anything from here. So this will be set by set to 20, 30, 10 by default, and according to that our data will be paginated. So for on every change, this function will be called, and according to that we'll get the records on our front end. So now everything should work as expected. So if we save and reload our browser, now we are getting 10 records by default. If I go ahead and change that to 20, then I should see 20 records, but it's not working here. So we have a value of paginate as 20, and maybe this is not working. Okay, I made a silly mistake here. That is, we need to append a ampersand here. Save that again. And let's go ahead and reload our browser once again. So the way I knew that error is because I checked on the network tab and the ampersand was missing here. So now again, let's check it once again, last time. And if I go ahead and change that to 20, then we should see 20 records. And yes, everything is working fine. So this much for this video. So in the next part, we'll be implementing the search feature. So we'll be implementing the searching for multiple columns, searching by multiple columns. And so one last reminder that if you like the content, do subscribe to the channel. I'll be posting some more content related to Vue, Laravel, Livewire in the future. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you in the next one.